Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're tackling a really fundamental process, hemostasis. It's kind of the body's balancing act, isn't it, between stopping bleeding when you need to and, well, not clotting when you shouldn't.
That's a perfect way to put it. Hemostasis, really, it just means stopping blood flow, but the regulation behind it. Immensely complex. You need it to seal an injury perfectly. Tip too far one way, you get thrombosis, unwanted clots. Too far the other, you get dangerous bleeding.
And that's our mission for this deep dive, using Port's Essentials of Pathophysiology, Chapter 22, as our guide. We'll walk through how it should work first, the normal steps before we get into, what happens when it all goes wrong.
Right, so let's start at the beginning. A blood vessel gets injured. What happens, instantly?
Stage 1, almost immediate, vascular constriction. The body just slams on the brakes, yeah.
Exactly. First response is that vessel spasm. Narrows the opening, slows down the blood loss. Partly neural reflexes, but the key players locally are chemical mediators.
Okay, like thromboxane A2, TXA2, and serotonin. I remember those come from platelets. And
Yeah.
the book mentions endothelin 1 is, super potent.
Extremely potent vasoconstrictor, yeah. But here's where that fine-tuning kicks in immediately. While those chemicals are yelling constrict right at the wound, the healthy, uninjured cells right next door, they release something called prostacyclin, and it does the exact opposite.
Vasodilation, and it stops platelets sticking there.
Precisely. It keeps the clot localized just to the injury site. It draws the line, basically.
Okay, slow down. Now you need to actually plug the hole. Stage 2, formation of the platelet plug. So platelets are the main building blocks here.
They are. Thrombocytes, little cell fragments, don't live long, maybe 8 to 12 days.
Yeah.
Thrombopoietin controls how many are made. And forming the plug, that's like a 3-step mini process.
Yeah.
Adhesion, activation, aggregation.
Let's break that down. Adhesion first. The vessel's broken, collagen's exposed underneath. How do platelets grab onto that? It sounds slippery.
They need help. They need a specific protein called von Willebrand factor, or VWF. Endothelial cells make it. When there's an injury, VWF kind of unfolds and acts like double-sided tape.
Okay.
It sticks to the exposed collagen on one side and grabs passing platelets on the other. Forces them to adhere right there.
So VWF gets them stuck. What's next? Activation.
Yep. Once they stick, they activate. They literally change shape, get all spiky, and crucially, they dump out chemicals stored in their granules. The really important ones for amplifying the response are ADP and more TXA2.
So they call for backup.
Exactly. Those chemicals pull in more and more platelets. They stick to each other. That's aggregation and build up that initial temporary plug, the primary hemostatic plug.
And clinically, this platelet activation step, this is huge for pharmacology, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Think about everyday aspirin. It blocks COX-1, which stops TXA2 from being made.
Yeah.
No TXA2, less platelet aggregation,
Right.
less clotting. And other drugs, like the thienopyridines, clopidogrel, for example, they block the ADP pathway. So same idea. You target this early platelet plug formation to help prevent things like heart attacks or strokes, which are often arterial clots.
Okay, we've got a temporary plug, but it needs reinforcing, right? That brings us to stage 3, blood coagulation, the cascade.
Right. Now we need something stronger. The goal here is to take fibrinogen. It's just a soluble protein normally grifting in the plasma and convert it into fibrin. Fibrin is insoluble. It forms this tough kind of mesh.
Like biological cement for the platelet plug.
That's a great analogy. It makes the plug stable and strong.
And we always hear about 2 main pathways starting this cascade off. Intrinsic and extrinsic. What's the difference? What kicks them off?
The extrinsic pathway is the express lane. Activated by major trauma damage to the vessel and the tissues around it. Those damaged tissues release something called tissue factor that gets things going fast, clotting in about 15 seconds.
Wow, okay. And intrinsic.
Intrinsic is slower, maybe 1 to 6 minutes. It gets activated when blood simply makes contact with the exposed collagen inside the injured vessel wall. Factor 12 is the trigger there.
But even though they start differently, they end up merging, right, into a common pathway.
They do. Both routes lead to the creation of something called prothrombin activator. That's the enzyme that does the next crucial step, converting prothrombin into thrombin.
And thrombin is the key.
Thrombin is the master enzyme here. It's what takes the soluble fibrinogen and snips it into fibrin monomers, which then link up to form that insoluble mesh.
Now, for this whole cascade to work properly, the book stresses a couple of essential helpers, cofactors. Vitamin K, it's one.
Absolutely critical. Your liver makes most clotting factors, but it needs vitamin K to properly synthesize factors 2, 7, I, X, and X, and importantly also protein C, which we'll get to. Without enough K, you might make the proteins, but they just don't work. They're inactive.
And the other big one is calcium, factor 4.
Yep. Calcium ions are needed for, well, pretty much every step of the cascade. It's involved all over the place. That's why, blood collection tubes often have chemicals that bind calcium like EDTA or citrate to stop the blood from clotting in the tube.
You mentioned protein C. If this cascade is so powerful, how does the body stop it from just going wild and clotting everything? There must be breaks.
There are very important ones. Natural anticoagulants. Antithrombin, the third, is a major one. It circulates and inactivates thrombin and several other clotting factors.
Okay.
And you have plasma proteins C and S. They work together. Protein S helps protein C, and activated protein C specifically targets and breaks down factors V and 8, so it actively dampens the cascade.
And there's a common genetic issue related to this brake system, isn't there? Factor V Leiden.
Exactly. Factor V Leiden is the most common inherited risk factor for hypercoagulability, for excessive clotting. People with this mutation have a factor V that's resistant to being broken down by activated protein C.
So the off switch is broken.
Pretty much. The cascade keeps going stronger and longer than it should, especially factor V's contribution. This significantly raises the risk for things like deep vein thrombosis, DVT.
Okay, so the clot forms, the bleeding stops, the vessel starts healing. What happens to the clot itself? It doesn't stay there forever, does it? Clot resolution.
Right. Two main things happen. First is clot retraction. Within about an hour, the platelets trapped in the clot use their internal machinery actin and myosin, like tiny muscles, to contract.
Squeezing it.
Yeah, it squeezes out the trapped serum, makes the clot denser, and pulls the damaged edges of the blood vessel closer together. If this step fails, it often points to a low platelet count.
And then the final cleanup, getting rid of it completely.
That's fibrinolysis.
Okay.
Breaking down the fibrin mesh. There's an inactive enzyme precursor called plasminogen that gets trapped inside the clot as it forms. Later, as the tissue heals, cells release activators, like tissue plasminogen activator TPA. You might recognize that name. It's used as a clot-busting drug. Well, the body's own TPA converts the trapped plasminogen into its active form, plasmin. And plasmin is like a little enzyme scissor that digests the fibrin strands, dissolving the clot from the inside out, allowing normal blood flow to return.
That's quite the elegant system when it works. But, of course, it doesn't always. Let's shift gears to when things go wrong. First up, hypercoagulability states. Too much clotting or thrombosis.
Yeah, the balance tips towards clot formation. And we tend to see two main patterns based on where the clots form. Arterial thrombi are often linked to issues with increased platelet function, usually in areas of high turbulent blood flow.
Like in atherosclerosis, damaged arteries.
Exactly. Atherosclerosis, smoking, diabetes, high cholesterol. These things damage the endothelium, the lining of the artery, making it rough, and promoting platelet sticking and activation where it shouldn't happen.
And sometimes the problem isn't platelet function, but just too many platelets. Thrombocytosis.
Right. Platelet count over 1 million per microliter. We distinguish primary or essential thrombocytosis. There's usually a myeloproliferative disorder, a problem in the bone marrow itself, often involving the thrombopoietin receptor, from secondary or reactive thrombocytosis. That's where the high platelet count is a reaction to something else, like major surgery, infection, cancer, chronic inflammation. The body's just churning out more platelets in response.
And that primary kind, essential thrombocytosis, can cause a really specific symptom, right? Erythromelalgia.
Yes, good point. It's this, quote, distressing burning pain, usually in the fingers and toes. It's caused by tiny clots, those platelet aggregates, blocking the very small arterioles in the extremities.
Okay, so that's arterial clots, often platelet-driven. What about venous thrombi, like DVTs?
Venous thrombi are more often associated with stasis, slow-moving blood, and increased activation of the coagulation cascade itself, rather than platelets being the primary driver.
So things that slow down blood flow.
Definitely. Prolonged immobility, like being stuck in bed after surgery, long flights, heart failure, where circulation is sluggish. Also, cancer is a big risk factor. Tumors can release tissue factor, kicking off the extrinsic pathway.
And hormones. I remember reading about oral contraceptives and pregnancy increasing risk.
Yes, hyperestrogenic states. Both pregnancy and combined oral contraceptives increase the liver's production of several clotting factors, shifting the balance towards coagulation.
There's also an autoimmune condition mentioned, antiphospholipid syndrome. That sounds nasty.
It is. It's an acquired disorder where the body makes antibodies against certain phospholipids that are normally involved in regulating coagulation. These antibodies paradoxically increase clotting activity,
Leading to
recurrent clots, both venous and arterial. And it's also a significant cause of recurrent pregnancy loss, a really challenging condition.
Okay, that covers excessive clotting. Let's flip the coin now. Bleeding disorders. Failure to clot properly. How does this usually show up?
Often, it's more superficial bleeding initially. You might see petechiae, those tiny, pinpoint red or purple spots, or purpura, which are larger bruises. Bleeding from mucous membranes, like nosebleeds or gum bleeding, is also common. It often points towards a platelet issue or maybe a vessel wall problem.
Starting with platelets, the main issue is often too few of them, right? Thrombocytopenia.
Correct. Defined as a platelet count below 150,000 per microliter. And the reasons fall into sort of three buckets: not making enough, trapping too many, or destroying too many.
So decreased production could be
Well,
plastic anemia, radiation, certain infections like HIV.
exactly. Problems in the bone marrow. Increased trapping or pooling. The classic example is an enlarged spleen and splenomegaly. The spleen normally removes old platelets, but if it's enlarged, it holds on to too many, lowering the count in circulation.
But increased destruction seems like the most complex category. Lots of potential causes there.
It really is. Drugs are a big one. Drug-induced immune thrombocytopenia, DITP. Certain drugs, even common ones like aspirin or some antibiotics, can trigger an immune response where antibodies bind to platelets, leading to their rapid destruction.
And then there's the really tricky one, heparin-induced thrombocytopenia, HIT.
Ah, yes. The paradox. Heparin is an anticoagulant meant to prevent clots. But in some people, it triggers an immune reaction against a complex formed by heparin and a platelet protein called platelet factor 4.
And this immune reaction.
It doesn't just destroy platelets, causing thrombocytopenia, it also activates the remaining platelets, leading to widespread clot formation. So you get low platelets and life-threatening thrombosis at the same time. It's a true medical emergency.
Wow. Okay, what about purely autoimmune destruction?
That's immune thrombocytopenic purpura, or ITP. Here, the body makes antibodies directly against proteins on the platelet surface. These antibody-coated platelets are then primarily destroyed by the spleen.
And one more severe, rare one involving destruction, thrombotic thrombocytopenic purpura, TTP.
TTP is nasty. It's a syndrome, really low platelets, red blood cells breaking apart, hemolytic anemia, kidney failure, fever, neurological problems. The underlying cause is usually a deficiency in an enzyme called ADP-TS13.
What does ADP-TS13 normally do?
It acts like scissors, chopping up very large strands of von Willebrand factor. Without enough ADP-TS13, these ultra-large VWF strands circulate, causing platelets to spontaneously clump together in small blood vessels all over the body, leading to organ damage.
Okay, shifting from platelet numbers to actual clotting factors, deficiencies there. Von Willebrand disease is apparently the most common inherited one.
By far. Affects maybe up to 1 or 2% of people, though often it's very mild. It's a problem with von Willebrand factor itself, either not enough or it doesn't work right.
And since VWF helps platelets stick and carries factor VIII.
Exactly. You get a double hit. Impaired platelet adhesion and reduced levels or stability of factor VIII, leading to a mild to moderate bleeding tendency. Prolonged bleeding time is a key finding.
And the classic, more severe inherited factor deficiency, Hemophilia A.
That's the factor VIII deficiency. It's X-linked recessive, so primarily affects males. Severity varies, but in severe cases, patients experience spontaneous bleeding, especially deep into muscles or, quite characteristically, into large joints, knees, elbows, ankles. This joint bleeding can cause chronic pain and disability.
We've covered inherited factor issues. What about acquired deficiencies?
The big one is liver disease. Cirrhosis, hepatitis, anything significantly damaging the liver will impair its ability to synthesize most of the clotting factors.
Because the liver makes them. Makes sense.
And the other major acquired cause is vitamin K deficiency. Remember, vitamin K is needed to make factors 2, 7, IXX, and protein C functional. So if you're deficient, maybe due to malnutrition, malabsorption, or certain drugs like warfarin, your liver makes the factors, but they're inactive. Result, bleeding.
Lastly, on the bleeding side, the book mentions bleeding not related to platelets or factors, but the vessels themselves. Non-thrombocytopenic purpura.
Right. Here, the coagulation test might be totally normal. The problem is structural weakness in the blood vessel walls. Classic example is scurvy vitamin C deficiency. You need vitamin C for strong collagen, which supports vessel walls.
Oh.
Other causes include Cushing disease, where excess cortisol weakens tissues, and senile purpura, common in older adults, where aging and sun exposure damage the collagen in the skin, making capillaries fragile and easily bruised.
Okay. We've covered too much clotting, too little clotting. Now for the nightmare scenario where both happen at once. Disseminated Intravascular Coagulation, DIC. The paradoxical killer.
DIC is It's a devastating complication. It's never the primary diagnosis. It's always triggered by something else: catastrophic, massive infection, sepsis, major trauma, certain cancers, obstetric complications.
How can you be clotting and bleeding simultaneously? It sounds impossible.
It happens because the underlying trigger causes massive, uncontrolled activation of the entire coagulation cascade everywhere in the body. Tiny clots, microthrombi, form in small vessels throughout organs.
Causing organ damage from lack of blood flow.
Exactly. Kidney failure, respiratory failure, shock. But this widespread clotting consumes all the available platelets and clotting factors at an incredible rate.
Uses them all up.
Completely depletes the supply.
Right.
So once the factors and platelets are gone, there's nothing left to stop bleeding anywhere else. The patient then shifts rapidly into severe, uncontrollable hemorrhage from IV sites, wounds, mucous membranes, everywhere.
So ischemia from the microclots and hemorrhage from the consumption of clotting components.
Yeah.
A true system collapse.
It really is the ultimate failure of regulation. So just to recap the key takeaways, hemostasis is this intricate balance through 3 stages: vessel constriction, the platelet plug, and the fibrin clot via the coagulation cascade. It's tightly regulated by natural promoters and inhibitors. Hypercoagulability or thrombosis often involves either overactive platelets causing arterial clots, particularly with turbulent flow, or an overactive cascade often linked to blood stasis causing venous clots. Bleeding disorders stem from weak vessels, not enough platelets, platelets that don't work, or deficiencies in specific clotting factors inherited or acquired.
Got it.
And DIC. Well, DIC is that catastrophic state where massive clotting consumes everything, leading paradoxically to widespread bleeding and organ failure.
It brings up a final thought, doesn't it? We talked about the liver-making factors, vitamin K being essential. Think about chronic diseases. Chronic liver disease or chronic kidney disease affecting things like vitamin K metabolism or clearance of activated factors. How much does the health of these seemingly unrelated organs dictate your chances of survival when you actually face a major trauma or bleed? It shows how interconnected everything really is.
That's a really profound point. The whole body is involved in keeping this balance.
Well, thank you for walking us through that complexity, and thank you, our listeners, for joining us on this deep dive into hemostasis. We hope this helps make sense of a vital and sometimes dangerous system. We'll catch you next time on The Deep Dive.